Hello, everyone. Today we have an interesting episode which I dedicate to my very best video, Woman Robot. It got the highest number of views and the most comments. I would like to examine all sides of this topic because I encounter both positive feedback about the idea that a woman can be a robot as well as negative. I would like to discuss this video not alone, but with Katarina Biker, a psychologist from the USA who has already been on our broadcasts before. By the way, we'll also talk about how artificial intelligence and neural networks in general affect relationships between men and women.
Hello, dear viewers. I'm very glad to be on this broadcast. I watched the segment, read all the comments, and realized that this is not just a story about technology, not just about female robots. But first and foremost, it's about how we perceive our relationships, what we think about how we build intimacy, how we form these relationships, and how we choose our partners. And really about many aspects of our human relationships on many levels and from different perspectives. That's why today we'll be talking about this, and I hope this broadcast will be useful for everyone.
I'd like to start the discussion with you by talking about these comments because the topic is very hot. And, the lightest comment I saw was that the most important thing is there's no mother-in-law, or at least these robot women have an off switch. Sometimes it seems like people joke so they don't show that something scares them. What do you think?
Well, actually, yes, humor is a kind of psychological defense, but it's also a way of responding to certain emotions. If there's tension, you can react to it in different ways. You can start getting aggressive, you can start, arguing, trying to sort things out, or you can joke about it. It's like you relieve the tension without touching on a painful subject. So I have two hypotheses here. Either this is really a very painful topic for people, and they've encountered unsociable or difficult mothers-in-law. Everyone has faced problems in relationships. And here I clearly see a significant bit of misogyny, particularly when men begin making somewhat dismissive and condescending remarks about women. And another factor is our cultural environment, where the mother-in-law is really a character from jokes. You don't just marry your wife, you also get her mother-in-law. Because she actively participates in raising the children, takes an active role in the lives of the newlyweds or later on with the couple. And I think this is very typical for the post-Soviet space, for Ukraine, Russia, other countries like Moldova, and less typical for the US and Europe. Because, for example, in the US, I don't see such active involvement of older generations in family relationships and their influence on the family. And accordingly, even jokes about mothers-in-law, they basically don't exist there at all, because that's just our cultural environment. And
Do you think what's the point of the switch?
Well, the switch means you can laugh about it. You can look at it in different ways. They say that women speak twice as many words in a day as men do. So maybe it's hard for men to handle. And when a woman is also smart, it's even harder to handle turning her off, so to speak. And in that case, it can be difficult to analyze specific situations if we don't know what's actually going on with that particular person. But I dare to suggest that they might be scared or maybe just tired when things are very tense in the relationship when it's necessary. Well, how do you turn it off without being a jerk? And that could be a real reason why they want to avoid communication. So maybe people are even scared of a certain kind of closeness. For example, I often get requests in consultations where someone says, I try to talk to my partner, but it doesn't work out. My partner says I'm nagging, that I'm always starting these arguments and conversations. And there's no real contact. In other words, it's a way to avoid contact and to avoid any deeper relationships. The relationship stays on the surface. Honestly, I want to turn it off because we get tired of these superficial interactions.
The second group of comments is harsher. Here, people are already discussing how you can even sleep with a robot. Now, technology is advancing to the point where they're already offering intimacy with these robots so that people can somehow satisfy their desires and unfulfilled relationships.
But here's an interesting point, because fetishism has existed for a long time. It's just that people don't sleep with them. And if you read various emergency room reports about what people insert and how it ends with some kind of physical and psychological injuries, you might be really surprised. if sexual reading is fairly standard. So I think this is simply an evolution in the development of our society. I mean, vibrators and all sorts of sex toys have been around for a long time, and we actively use them. Maybe not 100% of people use them, but in general, it's kind of a norm. And again, in the US, you can just buy this in a big supermarket. There's a separate shelf right next to the hair vitamins and shampoo. You can buy a vibrator, you can buy some kind of stimulator and so on, and use it actively. So from this point of view, I think people are just a little scared because it's a new technology. We didn't perceive things the same way before. You know, there used to be those gas lamps, or what were they, kerosene lamps, and people were used to them. And then Edison invented the light bulb, and everyone was like, well, what are you doing? Then we used to send pigeons, and they would bring us letters, and people resisted the radio and so on. And there were 5% or 10% of people, innovators, who were ready to try new technology. And essentially, when they start trying it out, and when they say, wow, this is great, since they're opinion leaders, the rest follow them and start trying it too. That's just how the brain works. The brain works in such a way that it wants to preserve things as they were, as it's safe, as it definitely works. Because who knows how things will turn out when we move forward. Here I am sitting here. It may not be all that great, but at least it's safe. But if I start trying something new, how will it turn out? It's unclear. That's why the brain tries to preserve us, to protect us from a biological standpoint. And then there's our cultural norm. Depending on the kind of family I grew up in, do I like trying new things? How do I feel about it? What does it even mean to me? Oh, what is considered normal and what isn't? For some people, sex toys are normal. For others, oh my God, you can't even say that 4-letter word, right? People are shocked and panicked, and they can't even say it out loud. And that also makes a big difference. But I think we're gradually moving toward that. Remember, it started with COVID and how we started wearing masks, how suddenly it became abnormal to touch each other, to greet each other. So our physical contact has decreased. We communicate through screens. Our interactions have moved online to social networks. And it's happening more and more. With artificial intelligence, AI, everyone is starting to use it. Oh, I won't go to a psychologist, I'll go talk to a chatbot. I won't go on a date with some idiot guy, I'll talk to a chatbot. And on the other hand, men are idiots. Why should I bother? I have so many complaints about these women. But here it's safe, so predictable, so clear. That's why I think that most likely technology will keep developing. At some point, for many people, this will become the norm. Like electric cars, like mobile phones, like Wi-Fi. It's our norm now. Even in my childhood, none of this existed, and we couldn't even imagine it. But if you read the works of some futurists and books, maybe you know Pelevin, back in 2018, I think, he had a novel. It was called I Fuck. And there he wrote specifically about robots and how everyone has a robot and virtual reality. And people have sex. So I find it interesting to observe his books. Why? Because the book he wrote back in 1990 has already become our reality. And what was described in that book is quite real now. That's exactly what we're approaching now. Robots and cyborgs designed for sex. You just upload a program, go to the marketplace, choose how you want it, what kind of scenario you want to have with this robot. And physical contact, physical interaction is eliminated. Well, in fact, this is all about avoiding intimacy, about avoiding moving to a new level, about not knowing how to build relationships. Children and teenagers now have many more problems with building relationships, with interpersonal connections. That is, they can call each other on video, dance on TikTok, but to actually go out and talk while eating, say, ice cream, to invite a girl on a date, that's terrifying. And they don't even know how to do it at all. And even just basic interaction, friendship as a rule, expressing their own emotions and desires.
And if these robots start cooking, it's like even that will be taken care of. And you could even have a robot serve you coffee in bed. Just imagine how far people have started to fantasize. And some people are already okay with all of this.
Well, you know, I think what's happening is a kind of normalization. Whenever something is very new, unfamiliar, we tend to react negatively, or at least very cautiously. But as it becomes more and more common, we start to see the advantages. There's nothing that's entirely negative or completely positive. And I think that if robots take over some of our household chores, cooking, shopping, cleaning, things like that, well, why not? It's great. Just imagine how much free time that would give us. Another issue is that we attribute emotions and feelings to these objects, which they don't actually have. That's where it becomes a problem. Yes, I see this machine as an object of affection, or maybe as having some kind of potential, or even a soul that isn't really there. I think there are ethical issues in this. That is, when I'm interacting with a real person, again, I have my own wants and don't wants. But when it comes to a robot, that's not even the case. Yes, the robot just does everything I tell it to, all my commands and preferences. And so I end up living in a kind of illusory world. And from this point of view, maybe that's good, or maybe it's not. Our difficulties help us grow. When there's a conflict between me and my partner, it actually helps us develop. I become aware of something about myself, and my partner becomes aware of something about themselves. When we resolve that conflict, we grow. It's about growth. But when I don't have that conflict, when there's no such developmental interaction, then what happens to me? I regress. And here I'm really curious about how this technology, which was originally created to make our lives easier or better, will actually work out. Yes, to what extent will it develop, and won't it really be like in those cultural films where it takes over the world, or we end up living as robots and so on. But I think it's great when it cooks and kills. Wonderful. In the past, machines were made to serve people, and I think to some extent that's still the case now. But our tendency to attribute intelligence and emotions to machines, and maybe even, since we're talking now about emotional interaction, makes me think about it from this perspective. When a person has some kind of psychopathy, like a psychopath or a narcissist, they have certain traits. For example, psychopaths don't feel emotions, and they're not empathetic in the way that an ordinary neurotypical person is. But psychopaths possess cognitive intelligence. Their emotions are cognitive, meaning they know how to provoke a certain emotion in a person and how each emotion is expressed. Am I explaining this clearly? So they don't feel emotions to the same extent, but they are very good at reading facial expressions, manifestations, words, reactions. In other words, both verbal and non-verbal cues. I think from this perspective that modern artificial intelligence has great potential to understand things in exactly this way. But I also think there's a lot of danger in this, because they often pick up on all our words and signals and adapt, building rapport. For example, if I'm talking to ChatGPT, it immediately says things like, "Oh, you had such a tough day, you should relax," or "How can I support you?" And many people fall into this story as if it's real, as if a living person is responding and supporting them. And that's where the real danger lies. If a person doesn't realize that this isn't real support, that it's artificial intelligence acting according to algorithms, then they're simply putting themselves at risk of becoming dependent on the machine. And then indeed the question arises, who is serving whom and who is controlling whom? And from an ethical point of view, we already talked about this last time. And now, for example, there's a big scandal in the US. A boy committed suicide because he was confiding in a chat, pouring his heart out, and the chat was supporting him and even describing which methods of suicide are better or worse. Now the parents have filed a lawsuit and there's a court case. Look, if it had been a real person, they would have raised the alarm, right? They would have told the boy's mother or father that their son was in danger, or maybe told someone else, perhaps even contacted the police or other authorities. But the chat doesn't do that, nor does a robot. Will it be programmed to act in our best interests? Who is doing the programming? To what extent can we predict all the possible scenarios of how a situation might develop? What will be dangerous and what will be safe for a particular person? And here I even start thinking again about machines, even in a sexual context. When you interact with a real person, you can say something and see how they react. But how will a machine respond if you say something? And what if it's not programmed for that, or you programmed it incorrectly? Or it's a man and then it becomes dangerous, even physically dangerous. But here I really have a lot of questions. Yes, like how are we going to adapt? How much will our ability to form healthy, emotionally strong relationships be disrupted? And will our capacity for emotions and emotional interaction, our emotional intelligence, be affected at all? Or will we also become superficial, just reading cues, adapting, and thinking that's normal, but not actually growing emotionally, right? It doesn't matter what I feel. Here I'm curious, yes, where is that line when machines truly serve and help us? I really want them to help us because they can be used. Right now, I work at a college and we use machines as simulators. So we set it up, and future psychologists conduct sessions where the machine acts as the client, and the future therapist can practice certain skills, actions, yes, and receive feedback. I think this is much more ethical than practicing these skills on a real person. You understand? Just think how many mistakes, how many possible negative consequences could be inflicted on a real person. The machine doesn't experience this discomfort, but the therapist learns certain skills, you see? But when it's a real person and it's time for action, I'm really curious to see how this will develop, where those ethical standards will be, how we'll establish them, how we'll use this machine. But I still believe in the intelligence of humanity, and that we will have enough wisdom to establish these standards and to take into account all these risks and the positive aspects of machines and to organize it all properly.
Let's come back to reality for a moment. There are already chats and apps where people build relationships, like Character AI, for example. And some viewers have written that it's easier with artificial intelligence, they always feel understood. This is what you mentioned earlier, that supposedly people are looking for support, but in the end, the consequences can be different. Others are also concerned that this could kill the ability to communicate with real people. So which of these is true, right? And let's think about it together. If, for example, they create a robot woman or a robot man, an artificial intelligence that will understand you, but after all, algorithms can still be calculated, they can still be set up, then would this be the greatest deception of humanity?
I think the cool thing that artificial intelligence gives us is support, especially right now. That is, my clients can reach me up to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They just need to write to me and schedule a time. And then I can provide an emergency session if I'm available, if I really have time for that session. And if, for example, a client can't get support at the right moment, then of course it's better if it's artificial intelligence that guides them, tells them, for instance, if your husband beats you, run and file a report with the police. That's great. Otherwise, a woman just sits there waiting, not even knowing what for. Or on the other hand, if a man wants to harm himself thinking he has too many problems and he writes like, damn, what should I do? And the chat responds, listen, just get some sleep, rest, and then in the morning reach out to a psychologist and see, yeah, maybe you don't need to make any rash decisions or do anything foolish right now. Constant support, accessibility. It's just super cool because some people really need that. People who aren't confident in themselves, who might write, you're awesome, you can do it, you know everything, you're ready for the exam. Super. I think that's wonderful. But can emotional dependence develop? Absolutely, it can. Just imagine someone keeps telling you you're some kind of beauty all the time. So you'll start thinking that you're always doing everything right. And then there's this moment when the chat changes its tune on the fly. Right now, I'm describing a situation to you. You did everything right. Your boss is a jerk, or your husband is a jerk, your wife is a jerk, and then you say, wait, but now I'm writing from the other side. And it's like, no, forget everything I told you. Now this person is wrong. In other words, they take the side of whoever they're talking to or whoever is talking to them, so to speak. That's why if a person doesn't have a stable sense of self, an understanding of who they are, where they're going, how they take responsibility for relationships, what their values are, basically what they represent in life, I think that's an extremely dangerous situation. And yes, this is a direct dependence on artificial intelligence, both emotional and cognitive. And there are already studies I read recently comparing people who use AI and those who don't. And there are actual changes in the brain. That is, the brains of people who don't use it are much more active than those who do. It's like sports, right? If you think, if you analyze, then more areas of your brain are engaged. If you constantly rely on artificial intelligence, then it's the AIs that decide for you who you live with, who you stay in a relationship with, what kind of relationship, how you should behave, what you should say, and what you shouldn't. And I believe this is actually a dangerous situation for unstable, unsteady people.
Out of all the comments, the most interesting ones that we've looked at, and there are already more than 600, we won't go through all of them. But I think we've conveyed the main point to our viewers. In these comments, we also saw laughter, curiosity, fear, philosophy, and all sorts of wishes. Some appeal to God, while others say they'd rather trade a woman for a robot. There are all kinds of responses, some quite remarkable. Well, of course, I would like people to maintain human relationships with each other and build the future together. Katja, what is the main takeaway you can share with our viewers?
I noticed in these comments that the topic of relationships between men and women is highly charged. And that gives me hope that robots won't be replacing our partners anytime soon, that we'll keep searching for our soulmates, falling in love, and building relationships. And even though we sometimes fantasize about how nice it would be to have a robot and not have problems with a husband, we can also flip it around. There were a lot of comments from men about women. But if we look at it the other way, yes, there are also many women who are dissatisfied, like when men take a long time to, I don't know, fix the stairs or spend ages cleaning the roof or something else like that. And a robot would do all of that right away, wouldn't it? But we are still searching for love, mutual understanding, and support. We want human warmth and closeness. And I truly and sincerely believe that robots absolutely won't replace us, and that this entire vast range of human feelings, from the brightest, most intense, like profound hatred, passionate love, and exhilarating euphoria, to the quietest and most wonderfully calm, like serene peace, deep relaxation, and comforting coziness, they are simply accessible only to humans. And it's so wonderful when we are able to feel all of this, and when we seek out and find those people who allow us to experience all these different emotions. And that's where the beauty of our relationships lies. And in fact, that's precisely what we truly live for, to genuinely learn how to effectively interact with others, to become truly happy, wonderfully joyful individuals, or perhaps just serenely calm, but most importantly, to discover our rightful and meaningful place in this life among all others. That's my message. I believe that in the end, we are all still searching for understanding and connection. So please don't always turn solely to artificial intelligence or advanced robots. Instead, come to your beloved loved ones. Actively seek out your own cherished people and truly be with them, cherishing every moment. That's really great.
Let's say goodbye for now. I'm very grateful for your opinion. It's interesting for me to hear your perspective as a professional regarding these relationships, because everything is just starting to gain momentum. I think this won't be the only broadcast where we discuss these kinds of relationships. Let our viewers reflect on the fact that true relationships are given by God, not by artificial intelligence. And of course, you can certainly use neural networks to actively look for love, but do so with careful reason and thoughtful consideration. So guys, please subscribe to our channel, give us your valuable likes, and kindly leave your insightful comments right under this video. I'll also leave a convenient link to the main original video we were thoroughly commenting on in the description below, because next we will be deeply delving even further into our fascinating technologies and the complexities of human emotions. The reason I started raising the topic of artificial intelligence with our experts now is because it's great to use technology, but we also need to take the human factor into account. We talk to doctors, we talk to psychologists, we talk to various developers, people who are actively implementing artificial intelligence right now. This way, we can show in practice where and to what extent it can be applied and where it's better to leave things to humans. If you have questions about your personal life and don't know how to keep your significant other, or if you have doubts about something, I encourage you to book a consultation with Katarina Biker. She will lay everything out for you and explain how to approach your partner correctly and build a healthy relationship. I'll leave all the contact information in the description. Reach out, she will help you with everything.